Hello and welcome back to my channel. My name is Nicole and it's time for one final massive book haul. In all fairness, this book haul is a collection of books that I've hauled probably as far back as April. I just haven't made room in my recording schedule to actually post a video of all the books that I've hauled. So yeah, these are basically the last of the books that I wanted to buy before I move. And one of the reasons for that is pretty much all of these books are used, and my local used bookstore has an amazing selection of classic books at a very, very cheap price. Whereas where I'm moving to, there is only one used bookstore, and I have not visited it at all. And so this may be my last chance to buy some good used classics. And pretty much all of these are books that I've either been looking for a very long time, or specifically editions quite frequently of books that I've been looking for a while. So let's go ahead and get started because I have a lot of books to go through. I'm pretty much going to just show you the book, tell you the title, and maybe just a little bit about the book and maybe why I was interested in buying it and go from there. So I have divided the books more or less so around when they were published. And so I'm going to start with all the books that I got that are 18th century British lit. Which is a really strange time period for some people because it's like pre Jane Austen and everything. But it's a time period in British literature that I personally really enjoy. The first book that I picked up was Moll Flanders by Daniel Defoe. This is a book that I previously had an edition of, but it was an edition where I mentioned that the font was, or the capitalization in the book was all over the place because during this time period, capitalization was not standardized. It can drive you crazy if you don't know what's going on, and it's not a necessary feature to understand the book. So I just wanted to be able to focus on the story. So I specifically went and looked for copies of Moll Flanders that had standardized capitalization. And so I found from looking that the Barnes and Noble Classics does both of those things. So I got this because I did also want an edition that had a few notes at the back. That was not the only copy I got of Moll Flanders. I also picked up this little gem because I absolutely love this cover. It describes Moll as born into poverty, a woman vows to become rich any way she can. I have recently discovered that Tor has a classics line, and in the 90s, they printed them all with these amazing covers. In my opinion, amazing. I just think they're hilarious because they don't feel like a classic book at all to me. And the descriptions on them are always super dramatic. Apparently, I was on a Daniel Defoe kick while I was at the store, so I also picked up a copy of Roxana by Daniel Defoe. I have never read this book, which where I should mention Moll Flanders is a reread for me, but I am really looking forward to this story. This is another autobiographical account of a young lady named Mademoiselle de Belleau, the willful daughter of French Protestant refugees. And I love the description here of this book being as an unromantic romance which brilliantly illustrates Defoe's talent of lying like the truth, which I think is so true. If you have read Moll Flanders, I have never so consistently throughout an entire book wondered if the main character is lying to me, and being completely stupefied and unable to answer that question as yes or no. So I'm looking forward to more of the same. This almost sounds like if Moll Flanders is sort of your lower class criminal autobiography, this kind of sounds like this is what the upper class was doing at the same time. And again, since I discovered that the trick for me with Daniel Defoe was to get a more modernized version of the writing style, I picked up Robinson Crusoe. I had DNF'd this earlier this year in trying to read my son's edition of the book, and I remembered, oh, it was largely because the capitalization was irritating the crap out of me. So once again, Barnes& Noble's Classics to the rescue. This is not sponsored by Barnes& Noble's. Gosh, don't I wish it was. Doesn't my wallet wish it was? But anyway, so once I realized that was the issue, I went back and picked up a copy of this because I really do want to read Robinson Crusoe again. If you have not read Robinson Crusoe, it is regarded as the first English novel, and it tells a story of shipwreck and survival on the island. This is kind of like the first like version of Survivor. And the final book that I picked up that is also 18th century British lit was The Mysteries of Udolpho. So all of these books, ironically, are books that I have owned or currently own a different edition of, and it was just kind of going with the theme of I was getting really frustrated with some of my copies of books and discovered that there are certain editions that I like better than others. Um, I have this book in an Oxford World Classic, and I just find that version of the book very stiff to read, and I cannot stand the fact that the notes in the book are at the back. I hate doing all of that flipping, and they also don't mark in the book for you when you get to a note that's at the back, so you have to like constantly be thinking about it, which I also don't like. This edition of uh, the Mysteries of Udolpho is put out by Dover Publications. They don't tend to have a lot of notes or any notes in their books at all, but I don't tend to really mind that the first time I read the book, and I do still have the Oxford World Classics editions. So if I get really stuck on some reference, I can always go and look in there. But I read No Name by Wilkie Collins in a very similar edition, and I liked it. The font is a little bit on the bigger side, and the book just has a good feel, and it's fairly floppy, so that's always important. The Mysteries of Udolpho is a Gothic novel told by Anne Radcliffe. I read The Romance of the Forest earlier this year and really enjoyed all but one section of the book. And I have heard that a lot of people, slash most people, it seems, like The Mysteries of Udolpho even better. So I have very high expectations that I will thoroughly enjoy this. So, having discovered some of my favorite editions of classics, I kind of got on a roll and started intentionally looking for them. And so I made sure to pick up a couple of copies of my some Victorian classics that I wanted to read, including Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes. I'm not actually sure that this is written in the Victorian age. I don't think it actually is, but seeing as how people just like to tell you when this particular edition was published and not the original publication date, I couldn't tell you. I will put it on the screen for you. I have not read any Sherlock Holmes. I think this is actually the second book in the series, but from what I understand, I don't think you need to read them back to back. Um, Either way, I don't really care. I was just happy because this is another Tor classic, and there's the picture for you. And more excitingly, here's the description that they give. There's mystery, danger, and death in the air. The game is afoot. Da da da. He's rude, arrogant, cold, unfriendly, and easily bored. Nobody minds because he's a genius at solving mysteries. So I just love the way Tor Classics talks about the books. Yeah, so and they also make sure to let you know that it's complete and unabridged. So yes, that was definitely like a cover edition buy for me. Along with that, I got Charles Dickens' Great Expectations. Again, this is a book I already have an edition of, but I again just love these Tor Classic editions. This one is a little less comical than all the rest of them, but it does say a poor boy with rich dreams who finds a fortune where he least expects it. Is it the friends that he makes along the way? Maybe. And finally, thanks to one of my viewers, Ben, I blame you, I picked up a copy of Nicholas Nickleby. I only have this book in a hardcover edition, and I prefer to read my books in paperbacks. So when I saw that, yep, they had a Tor Classic edition, I had to get it. It says life in a dreary boarding school leads a young man to adventures in merry London. That is generally probably not how I would describe any of Dickens' books, but Tor did. And it's nice because they do a lot of mass market paperbacks, but they have a very nice feel to them. This is Dickens' third novel, and according to the back, is a shocking expose of the educational system and a rich and absorbing portrait of the eccentricities and amusing foibles of the human spirit. Yes, they actually said foibles. And yet another edition buy for me was Wives and Daughters by Elizabeth Gaskell. This is a book that I've heard really good things about and really would like to get to sometime, hopefully this year, but probably not till later this year. However, when I went to buy it, this was the edition that I really wanted. I just love this edition. I love the color. I love the picture on the front. I actually really enjoy Barnes& and Noble's classic editions. They're probably my second favorite edition of classics. Maybe I'll do a video on that sometime. Um, Partially because their print is larger. Like, no one needs tiny print in classic books. We've all accepted they're super long. So it's okay if you make it feel even longer by making the print legible. Sorry if the angle keeps changing slightly. There was not enough room in my chair for all the books that I hauled, so I have to keep getting up and down, and I have to keep moving the whole like camera setup and etc. So if that bothers you, I apologize. The next book I got, I was so excited to find. This was a book that I had given up all hope of ever actually finding a print edition of, and thought for sure that I was just going to have to download an e-reader copy of it or something like that. And that book is Georges by Alexandre Dumas. I'm sure if you're French, you wouldn't pronounce it Georges, but I'm not French, so that's how I pronounce it. Let me tell you about this book, and maybe you'll understand why I'm really interested in reading it. Swashbuckling adventure ensues in Georges, a riveting novel from the same author who wrote The Three Musketeers and The Count of Monte Cristo. In Georges, Alexandre Dumas pulls out all the stops for this tale of passion, identity, and racism. A sensitive boy of mixed race, Georges Meunier moves within the highest ranks of social circles in France and England before returning to the Indian Ocean island of Mauritius. He falls in love with Sarah. The only problem, she's engaged to the son of the powerful plantation owner, Monsieur de Malmedy. What follows is a story of a slave rebellion, duels, and battles at sea. So I heard about this book a while back. I have to admit that the cover of the book that I've seen, I like better than this cover. I'll put it up on the screen so you can see it. I really wish I had that edition of the book, but this will do because I'm mostly just interested in the story. This is just a very fascinating story for me and short for Alexander Dumas, but I'm expecting a lot of interesting themes and conversations to come up in this, as well as the usual like swashbuckling fun adventure that Dumas tends to put in all his books. Sticking with the French classics, I also found this lovely edition of the Charterhouse of Parma. I really liked this hardcover. I have not read this book, and usually I wait to buy hardcover editions of books until I know it's a book that I'm going to want to reread. But this was priced so well, and I really loved the look of this edition of the book that I didn't want to pass it up on the off chance that I read this book and decided that I did want to reread it over and over again. And worst case scenario, if I don't, I figured this would have really good resale value. This is a newer translation of the work by Richard Howard, so we'll see how that goes. I do tend to do a lot of research before buying editions of the book, but if it's a book that I like to reread and it's in translation, I do like to reread lots of different translations of the book, so this works for that as well. The Charterhouse of Parma is a book that talks about the exploits of Fabrizio, who joins the French army just before the start of the Napoleonic Wars. No, just before the Battle of Waterloo. So this should have quite a bit of military sort of historical fiction going on in it, but I do understand that it's also, kind of a war and peace, also talking about home life and that kind of thing. I am a little wary of this book because I don't tend to have a lot of luck with books that have the Napoleonic Wars featuring in them. I have no idea why. I want to say maybe it's just my poor knowledge of the Napoleonic Wars, and so they just reference things that I have no idea what they're talking about. So if anybody can recommend to me a interesting and fun and well-written book, fiction or nonfiction, that goes more into the Napoleonic Wars that might help give me more background, I would really appreciate it. Moving on to Russian classics, I bought The Brothers Karamazov. This is also a newer translation by Michael Katz. Again, I like to read books in multiple translations. I have an edition of The Brothers Karamazov, and I have mixed feelings about the translation that I have. So I read the opening page of this translation because that's usually how I figure out which translation I want to go with. Is I read at least the first page because usually you can get that for free anywhere online. And if I have a physical edition, I'll turn to a random page and read that as well. And thus far, I really liked this translation, thus I picked it up. And gosh, the only downside of book hauls is it makes you want to read all the books you just hauled, and like there's no time for that. And now I'm at the point where I've got to figure out like what books am I going to take with me when I move and what books am I going to say, yeah, I'm definitely not touching you for 4 months. Uh, anyway, I doubt this is going to be one of the ones that comes with me, but I have not seen this translation anywhere, and I was happy when I saw it at a bookstore. This is one of the few books that I hauled over the last couple of months that I hauled new. I guess the theme of this whole book haul is really just finding editions that I like. And I found this edition of Things Fall Apart by Chinua Achebe. If you've been following on my channel, probably pretty close to when I am posting this video, I will have just read Things Fall Apart as part of a sort of spontaneous pop-up read-along that I was doing. And yeah, I have never seen a copy of this edition of Things Fall Apart. And just with the read-along and everything, I just really liked it. And if you've read the book with me so far, um, there are lots of things on the cover of this book that will have a lot of meaning to you now. So I was really excited when I saw this, and it wasn't a lot, so I just wanted to pick it up. I also picked up The Genius by Theodore Dreiser. I have not heard of this book by him, but it is supposed to be the history of Eugene Whitlaw, an artist of uncertain temperament and certain talent who grew up in late 19th century. So I just really enjoyed the idea of reading about an artist at the turn of the century, at the end of Victorian age, where morality was a huge value at that time, and moving forward into new ideas of art and living. This reminded me a bit of Lust for Life because it's a very similar time period of when Van Gogh lived. And so, yeah, I was very curious to read and learn more about this book. So, I found two books that were in editions that are by a publishing imprint, I think it is, whose books I really enjoy and just am very interested in, and that would be Virago Modern Classics. This is associated with Penguin Classics, as far as I can tell. You can see the little penguin up there, but this is just their series line where they print simply modern classics, so usually early 1900s, from what I can tell. This particular book is called Red Pottage by Mary Cholmondeley. And this kind of reminds me in some ways of the last book that I read. It is about two friends, Hester and Rachel, who are living at the turn of the century, late 1800s, early 1900s, again, in the Victorian period. Morality is changing greatly, and it follows them and their two different ways of how they decide to do life. From what I can tell, one of them falls in love and ends up trying to have sort of the more typical marriage, and the other one seeks to strike out and use her creativity to become an author. And so I'm really interested to hear how both their stories go and to see, how things happen as they're sort of struggling again with the conventions of the time. The other Virago classic I found is The Squire by Enid Bagnold. The Squire, it takes place at a manor house where the master of the house, if you will, is off in Bombay, and his wife is left at home to be the temporary squire, if you will. And she is quite pregnant in this book and is busy raising her children while trying to be the squire of the house. And it's supposed to be a lovely novel with themes of childbirth, motherhood, and maturity. And the prose in this is supposed to be lovely. So I'm really looking forward to reading this and just hearing a bit about her home life and the sort of, stresses of life and motherhood and those kind of things. All things that I can relate to, but very different time periods. So it'll be interesting to hear how that goes. I'm also really interested to hear how, women would survive in their homes while their husbands would more or less so be on deployment for work or military or what have you. I did find a classic by Daphne du Maurier, whose works I guess I've decided to read all of. And the one that I found is Trilby, which I had only recently heard of. And when I heard about it, I was very intrigued. So I was really excited when I found this on the shelves. And this book gets placed alongside Dracula and Sherlock Holmes, is what it says on the back. So I find that a very interesting combination of books to sort of say it sits beside. But it tells the story of Trilby, who sounds kind of like a bohemian artist type, and the various strange characters that come into her life. Though I feel like in some ways maybe she's the strangest one of all. But again, it's I'm sorry, I said Daphne du Maurier. It is by George du Maurier, which is her father. That was the other thing that had me very curious about this book, is that I love writing families, and so I really wanted to see what her father's writing style was like and what influences there may or may not have been on Daphne's writing style. I was able to pick up two American classics. One is a book that was unknowns to me called McTeague. And I'm going to turn the book around because I find that picture very disturbing. But this is supposed to be one of sort of the first books in the American realism genre. And I'll put a couple other books up on the screen that may be more well known in that genre in case you want a sense of what this book would be similar to. So the storyline, as I can understand it, kind of reminds me a little bit of The Dentist and Little Shop of Horrors. So we'll see how that goes because is that going to be triggering? I don't know. And the other American classic that I picked up specifically was Ernest Hemingway's For Whom the Bell Tolls. So this is a nice Hemingway library edition. So there is some additional information at both the back and the front of the book. I specifically wanted this edition because of that. And I have not read any Ernest Hemingway, so I don't know if this is a good place to start with him. I think I have one or two other books by him, so we'll see which one I end up deciding to start with. But I do know that this is one of his works that I do want to read. Okay, finally getting down to the last handful of books that I purchased. And again, I was able to find so many books that I've been looking for a while. I don't know how that happened, but I was able to find a copy of Joyce Carol Oates' Black Water. This is a book that, from when I first heard about it, I really wanted to read. I have tried a book by Joyce Carol Oates before. I tried reading Blonde, and there was just something about her writing style, or really the writing of that particular book, that I wasn't really feeling, even though overall I thought her writing was very beautiful. And I like the topics that she writes on. She is not afraid to pick up a controversial topic or story and write about it. And that is definitely the case with Black Water. This tells the story of a senator who goes out on the 4th of July with a young woman, and their story ends in a tragic car accident. And there's a lot more to it, but yeah, I can't wait to read this. It's a really short book, so I figure even if I'm not a huge fan of her writing style overall, that I will probably still be able to finish this book and enjoy it for what it is. Also, the print in here is very large, so it's definitely like, I mean, honestly, it's probably a novella. So far be it from me to not pick up a New York Review book classic, and so I got the Strudelhof Steps by Hamito von Doderer. And this book takes place in Vienna in early 20th century and talks about the double staircase, which is mentioned in the title. And that staircase is apparently used as a metaphor for the intersecting and crossing of the paths of the lives of the various characters in here. This book definitely sounds like it is like more on the character study side than anything else. I love a good soap opera in a book. So I'm hoping this delivers on its promise, and it's a nice chunky book, which I'm always a fan of, as you know. A book that's actually been on my TBR for maybe 3 or 4 years now, and I thought would probably be on it for much longer just because I didn't think it was in print anymore. And in fact, I don't think it was in print anymore. I think it's recently been brought back into print, and that is Miss Mackintosh, My Darling by Marguerite Young. This is a mammoth book, as you can tell by the print, and comes in at around 1,300 pages. So this is a book that I heard about years ago in somebody's description for March of the Mammoth books, and it really intrigued me. I cannot tell you anymore at this point because, like I said, it's been on my TBR for years. What about the book and the description of what this book is about? I enjoyed. Sadly, the back of the book gives no description on this, and there's also very little on the inside, and the couple of places I've looked real quickly don't give any good descriptions. I'm sure if I dug more, I could find one, but it was just when I was thinking of mammoths to read, this sounded like one that I would enjoy. I was happy to just find it right on the shelves in my local Barnes and Nobles. I was not as happy to find it at a different Barnes and Nobles a week later on their buy one get one 50% off table. If I had just waited a week. But that said, it seems like this publisher, Oakley Archive Essentials, has brought this book back into print, which is nice because I had virtually given up finding it in a used bookstore. This is a nice, very floppy paperback edition, which is exactly what I want. And the print, while dense, is a decent size. This looks really intimidating holding it like this. Let's just focus on the nice cover. The next book that I picked up is, I don't know if I'd say outside my comfort zone, but it's definitely outside the area that I normally read in because it's a mystery. And I do not typically read mystery novels. I don't avoid them. It's just they're typically shelved in a different area and I have no idea where to start. And so I don't usually pick them up unless they happen to be of mixed genre or set in with other fiction books. But the book that I picked up was one that I saw on somebody else's channel, and it's called An Instance of the Finger Post by Ian Pierce. I was able to find a used copy of this, so I figured that would be a safe way to try. This is a nice, chunky mass market paperback edition of the book, and let me describe to you a little bit about what it's about and why I was interested in it upon hearing this. So it takes place in 1663, same time as Moll Flanders, and it is a mystery, sort of like just a basic who done it, who killed the guy kind of deal. And all the evidence seems to point to the servant girl, which again reminds me of Moll Flanders. However, the really intriguing part about this mystery is that it's told from, I think, four or five different perspectives, and each of those four or five different people point to someone else as being the murderer. So I thought that was really intriguing. Apparently, one of the main themes in this book is supposed to be, perspectives and how different people can tell the same story in different ways and come to different conclusions, which I just think is so true and such a fascinating idea to have within a story and particularly within a mystery. However, I was also very intrigued because I just have read Moll Flanders to hear about another book that, while not written very close to that time period, takes place in a very similar time period. And so I'll be interested to see just how they present that time period versus Moll Flanders, that kind of thing. I guess Moll Flanders is influencing my reading, is what I would say here. Another book that I bought is Minjin Lee's Free Food for Millionaires. This is one that has been on my TBR for a little bit. Have I read Pachinko yet? No. However, when I read the back of this, I became very interested in it. So it is about Casey Han, who is a strong-willed, Queens-bred daughter of Korean immigrants who is addicted to the glamorous Manhattan lifestyle she cannot afford, which I feel like is a story that all of us can relate to so far, or at least can understand. It is supposed to be a sweeping epic of love, greed, and hunger set in a landscape where millionaires scramble for the free lunches the poor are too proud to accept, and is addictively readable, as it says on the back. So I picked up this copy of the book. I was very intrigued by the description, and I was also interested to try something else by this author, given the popularity of her work, Pachinko. I will say, like, you see this? The book was like oddly cut or not correctly cut. And so I also got it discounted slightly, so that helped. And the final book in this book haul, thanks for sticking with me so long, is another book that I heard about quite a while ago, and it's historical fiction, which I don't typically read. But when I heard about it, I was like, I want to read that book because I want to know more about this, and I know very little about this situation. In fact, I think that was the first time when I saw a booktube video on this book that I had ever heard of it. And I like to enter history first through historical fiction and then go back and read a nonfiction about events or times or whatever. And in that case, I purchased Andersonville by McKinley Cantor. This is a novel that is about the notorious Confederate prisoner of war camp where 50,000 Union soldiers were held captive and 14,000 died under inhumane conditions. And I have heard nothing but good things about this book. And it really just goes into the time periods, how prisoners of war were treated, specifically at Andersonville, and the reasons why and that were behind that. And one of the other things that intrigued me about this book is that it's not just told from the perspective of the prisoners, it also includes perspectives of the commanders, planters, their families, roving bandits, and just a lot of other people in the area. It is a nonfiction, but it is also a Pulitzer Prize winning Civil War novel. So this will definitely be added onto my Pulitzer Prize project. In fact, maybe that's how I originally heard about this book, was somebody talking about their Pulitzer Prize project. Anyway, I am looking forward to reading this book at some point, even though I suspect that it will be like a harsh read. And surprisingly, it's not a mammoth. We're not even going to talk about how many of these books are over 800 pages. We're just going to let it go. So that's it. That is all of the books that I have hauled in the last almost 3 months. That's all. That's all. And yeah, I just wanted to share those with you since this is my last chance. A lot of them, yes, will be going into storage. So you might be like, why did you buy books just to store them? And hopefully I discussed that as I went along. I would say the main reason is because I finally found editions of books that I had been wanting, or just flat out found books I had been looking for quite a while and was having a hard time finding, and so I figured this may be my only opportunity to either buy them used or buy them at all. Were a couple mistakes made? Yes, Miss Darling, I'm looking at you. But I'm still happy to have all of these books finally in my collection, and I don't mind that that means they're just going to be sitting in storage for a while because again, most of these I don't think I would find again at the prices that I got them at. So let me know if you have read any of these books and if there's ones that you recommend. I always try and write down when any viewer leaves a comment recommending a book, and typically those recommendations go, "Ooh, I was so close." Right there in my acorn bowl, and so I pull from that sometimes during my TBR games. So obviously that won't be happening over the next couple of months, but I will still be keeping track of those recommendations. So let me know where I should start, and let me know if you've had any buys recently that you've been excited about. And that's it for today, and I'll talk to you next time. Bye.